accepted.
Okay, let's get started. Hello, my name is Piotr Kosiorowski. How are you? Okay, so in this presentation I wanted to share my experience coordinating architecture at a large global corporation. And in the morning I've heard Sander talking about ADRs and Architecture Guild. Later, we had James talking about the scale, and I've just thought that those topics fit very nicely into what I'm presenting, but I'm trying to present how to use those concepts in a real life, in real implementation. Okay, so first of all, for context, a few words about me. So my name is Piotr Kosiorowski. I'm currently responsible for enterprise architecture at Sabre. I started my career as a software developer. I was writing C, C++, Java, .NET applications. Last 18 years I spent in Sabre, where I started also as a developer, but I became an application architect, portfolio architect later, when I was responsible for the largest non-mainframe Sabre system, called their shopping. You've probably, if you've ever used Kayak or Skyscanner, it hit my system in the backend. Yes, the system is large, running on hundreds of back then physical computers, with millions of lines of code, over 40 components deployed, types of components deployed across those servers, and also over 10,000 transactions per second of customer traffic. Internal traffic was over 100,000 transactions per second to individual components. So as you can see, I have experience building systems, but 2 years ago I started complaining that we do not have coordinated architecture efforts at Sabre. And you get what you ask for, so I was asked to lead enterprise architecture team to look at coordinating architecture practices. Even though I'm not a process expert, I'm not a consulting guy, I prefer to build stuff. Okay, so just for context, a few words about Sabre. What is important, I wanted to show you the scale we operate. We operate in a travel industry. We have two kinds of products. One is IT solutions for airlines and hotels. So for example, we host all the airline planes and seat information in our system for specific airlines. We build system to manage load on the airplane or to run the hotel. But we also have a global distribution system. This is where we are an intermediary between travel agencies and travel suppliers. So 400 airlines, 70,000 agencies across the whole world. Actually, something like over 30% of airline tickets sold in travel agencies are sold on Sabre. So we operate at a large global scale. And the interesting fact is that it actually started in 1960 as a cooperation between American Airlines and IBM. So if you talk about legacy projects that are 5 years old, we have 60 years of legacy in software. But we also have, it's not only that code, but also the code that was built over the years. We acquired companies, so we have a lot of complexity and different technology stacks used within the enterprise. In 2020, we signed a strategic partnership with Google to migrate all of our content to Google Cloud. So we are just in the process of migrating all our, what we call open systems. It means non-mainframe technologies to the cloud and Google Cloud, and at the same time migrating mainframe code of mainframe into the Linux-based Java-based mainly systems. If we talk about scale, we have over 5,000 people in development organization. We expose over 600 public services. We have hundreds, more than 1,000 of systems internally. So even I'm 18 years in Sabre, I don't recognize all the systems that we have. When we started the migration, we had 35,000 servers in our own data centers and 8 mainframes that we are moving to the cloud. And we plan to be 90% ready by the end of this year. We are over 80% right now, I think. So, as you can see, it's a large-scale corporation with legacy and complicated ecosystem of things that we build and serve. Now, let's talk about the team. So, as I mentioned, 2 years ago, I was asked to lead the team. We gathered the team of 15 experienced architects across Sabre, across all our main development centers, Dallas, Krakow, and Bangalore. And we started to think what we can do together. We defined some roles within our team. We call it domain aligned. It means someone who has a domain experience and is working directly with developers within a given domain, providing them their subject matter expertise, but also working to make sure that we have a bidirectional communication between development teams and enterprise architecture. We also have program-aligned roles, as we call them. As every other corporation, Sabre has some global initiatives. We are building something big that needs coordination across multiple domains, and we have enterprise architects assigned to such programs. I will not be talking about those two in this presentation. We also have some functions that we call EA Central Office. This is the area where we are trying to build a community and make some decisions that are impacting not only individual domain, but rather the corporation as a whole. Of course, enterprise architecture is also involved in other activities like mergers and acquisitions, technical due diligence, and things like that. It's also outside of the scope of this presentation. Okay, so when we started, we started how to start. We had a discussion within our team. As a corporation, Sabre uses SharePoint, but I haven't found any developer who likes to store technical documentation on SharePoint yet. So we looked what teams are doing. Different teams had different solutions. They used wikis, many internal wikis, and finding a documentation was a nightmare. So we decided, okay, let's try to build something that would be usable from technical documentation standpoint. So we said it needs to be with the code, so it needs to be based on Git. It needs to be in some textual form. We've chosen ASCII doc because of other tool choices. We also wanted to support diagrams as a code, so we used Crocky and PlantUML. We focused on C4 model implementation. Actually, we use first 3 Cs, so it's more like C3, but we based it on C4. And as a tool that allows us to build the site with the documentation, we've chosen Antora. It's probably not a well-known project, but it allows people to build documentation website using ASCII doc based on Git repositories. What was important for us is that Antora supports multiple repositories. So we are not centralizing the storage of the documentation, but simply providing a tool and a framework for the teams to plug in their repositories into our documentation system, and we simply manage the top-level navigation, and they are responsible for their own area. Unfortunately, the search tool within Antora default search tool was not scaling to our needs, so we use Meili search as a search tool to support it. We deployed it on GCP, and initially we said it's a tool for enterprise architecture. We are documenting all our things within that. If other teams want to use it, we are open to plug in their repositories. Now, after 2 years, we have over 10,000 pages on Antora, and we have over 200 Git repositories that are plugged in, and we gather content from to build the technical website. This is actual screenshot from the top page of the website. And with those, within those 200 repositories, we probably have around 5 or that are enterprise architecture owned. All others are owned by the respective teams. So we feel it is a success from the adoption perspective, even though we haven't forced it to the teams. People are simply voting with their feet in this case. So we started, and we haven't introduced any kind of a governance. So we quickly found that there are some things that we don't like. So right now, we are in process of working on providing some recommended templates to build some tools, for example, for discovering pages that are not reachable, or for discovering empty pages or pages that look like placeholders, so we can notify people if some content is not maintained properly. But we also think about identifying automatically owners of the pages that left the company, because we care about finding a new owners and making sure that it is properly maintained, and also about putting an expiration date on some pages. So we can automatically verify it based on the Git repositories when the page was updated and if it really expired or not. So currently, the site is growing at around 400 pages a month. Why I'm spending time on it? Because when we look back, we see that it is a very important component of other things that we did, because this is a place where we store documentation and where teams know to reach where they have a problem and are looking for some kind of a documentation on other systems. Okay, so I mentioned Sander talked about the guild. So when we started, we thought, okay, let's build something similar. There is an article, architecture with 800 of my closest friends by Comcast, and we modeled our approach based on it. So Architecture Guild is a technical architecture-focused community. We have several key goals. One is simple knowledge sharing. The second one, that is probably the most important for me, is enterprise-level decentralized decision-making. And it also provides an umbrella for technical initiatives. We use several channels, email distribution lists, Microsoft Teams as it's a company standard, and we have weekly meetings. It is modeled also after Internet Engineering Task Force approach to writing RFCs and making decisions. So when we look at where we are today, so Sabre Architecture Guild has over 600 members currently. It's mainly architects, tech leads, operations people, but as we have a strategic partnership with Google, we also have some Googlers attending our meetings and being part of the community. As I mentioned, we have a weekly meeting. We have over 100 participants in a meeting every week. This is not a mandatory meeting for anyone, so it looks like people find value in those meetings. We have over 60 working groups formed till now, so you can see that this process is pretty active. Just to give you an example, I've talked about knowledge sharing meetings. There is not a lot to talk about. I've just selected several topics from the latest ones. Usually, internal teams are preparing a presentation. We are coordinating it, and it is a knowledge sharing discussion regarding some topics that are interesting for a broader community. We also support some vendor presentations. We had several ones with Google or other companies. So it's not the most interesting part, but it is very important because it brings people to those meetings and they feel they are getting value out of it. The second one, and I will spend more time on it, is enterprise-level decentralized decision-making. It is, I put a quote from Gregor here because I like it and I think decisions are really, really important. And what we tried to do is we tried to do a community-driven decision model for the enterprise. So we community source the decision needs. So everyone can submit a ask for making a decision. I have given problem. I think this is an enterprise-level problem. I need this kind of a decision. We have bi-weekly meetings. This is part of this weekly meeting I mentioned earlier, to review decision statuses. And on such meetings, we simply look at the decisions submitted, discuss them to really understand, and we decide if these are really enterprise-level decisions or something that can be decided by the team or even individual domain. Because we don't want to go into that level of details, just to not be a bottleneck for the teams. They can make those decisions themselves. We only look at the things that really need to be managed cross-domain. So when we identify such decision is needed, we form a working group. Working group is a small body, something like 5 to 10 people max, that includes many people from architecture guilds. It is on volunteering basis, but over time we also learned that we need to make sure that we have some key participants. It happened once to us that we made a networking decision in a group that had no one responsible for networking, and we had troubles with implementation, as you can guess. So it is EA responsibility to make sure that the group includes all involved parties. But participation is, majority of the cases, voluntary. The working group has a working group lead that is sometimes from enterprise architecture, sometimes from the person that is submitting the decision. And with this person's responsibility is just coordination. And from that point of time, this working group works offline to the architecture guild. They organize their own meetings, they document with meeting notes, they do different kinds of analysis. We had cases where deep financial analysis involving our finance partners were done. We had some cases where we were involving legal to make sure that it is okay from legal perspective. And all of it is documented. And this documentation is stored in Git and managed through pull requests, so it is all publicly available and published on Git docs that I've mentioned earlier. And the important thing is decision rights. So we decided that the model works like that the working group proposes a recommendation for a decision if they are able to reach a conclusion. And with such recommendation, it is publicly reviewed, and then it is officially approved by enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture theoretically has a veto right, but we have never used it. We approved all the decisions that were recommended by working groups till now. What is interesting, we also have some autocratic and democratic decisions, as I'm calling it. So the process I've described is the democratic process. Yes, we gather the inputs, we allow people to have a discussion, and we just documenting the decision as an enterprise-level decision. But in some cases, especially the ones that require compliance or have some legal implications, we had the process for making a decision that was not autocratic. There is no point in discussing if we should be SOX compliant or not. There are some consequences of making that decision and how we should architect our systems to meet it that need to be properly documented. And in this case, such autocratic decision is made and documented and reviewed exactly with the same process, but not decided through the community model. Okay, so let's talk about how we document it. So we started with architecture decision records, ADRs. We used the decision record template that was proposed by Mike Nygaard. So very simple one with title, status, context, decision, and consequences. And we quickly found that it's not enough for us. The problem is that it is too simple when we look at the scale of a decision, number of people involved, and the lifetime of those decisions. We now go back to decisions that we made 2 years ago, and we are trying to change them or update them, and we wanted to have more information stored there. So this is the template that we actually use. So I've marked the key elements that we've changed in yellow. So first of all, we decided to standardize on architecture decision record statuses. And you can see that even we have a state diagram for ADR statuses. Typically, the ADR is created in a draft mode. It is after the working group agrees on the decision, it is moved into reviewing state. Then the community can provide their input, make sure that they understand the decision, that it's written in a form that is readable for everyone. And when, after the reviewing period ends, it is submitted for approval to enterprise architecture, and we are approving it. There are some other states, like it can be withdrawn because we don't see a need to continue given a track, and this happened to several decisions. It can be replaced if we see a need for replacing a decision, and we have 2 states, I need to check them, rejected and deferred, that we've never used. We'll probably drop them going forward. We also standardized on wording, yes? So we looked and used RFC 2199 that clearly defines what must not, required, should, recommended, optional means in a very strict terms. There is a separate RFC that just defines this kind of wording, and we are very clear to follow those guidelines to make recommendation really understandable to people. We've added references section, so this references section is contains links to other documents that are important. We are trying to keep architecture decision records short and just about the decision. For example, when we have a decision about tool selection and we compared 20 tools, we don't put the information about those 20 tools in the decision. So architecture decision record contains the decision about the tool we've chosen, and references section contains a list to working group documents that contain detailed financial analysis, detailed gap analysis between the tools. So if someone is just interested in what tool should I use, they read the ADR and they know. If someone is interested why, they can go to the working group material and find out. We also have added notes section. Our assumption is that ADRs are immutable because we don't want ADR to change while someone is already relying on it. So we allow some editing changes, like if link is broken or we have a typo, that's of course, but we don't allow any semantic changes. And notes section allows us to add information to the architecture decision records that does not change the meaning, but clarify the intent that someone had. It happened several times that we made a decision, and a month later, someone came and said, I have this specific edge case, what should I do then? And if we felt that this specific edge case is generic enough, we added this comment into the notes section. So people know this is some additional explanation that can be added after the fact, but they can assume that the main body of the ADR is immutable. Some examples. I've just selected several ones. We have over 60 enterprise-level ADRs produced to date. Many other teams adopted it for their own purposes, so we have ADRs across Sabre used quite frequently. But for enterprise level, we have over 60 of them. Those were the working groups I've mentioned in earlier. So as you can see here, architecture impact of SOX compliance and GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT usage policy, those were autocratic ADRs. There was no community discussion about it, as they had some compliance and legal consequences. But all the others were decided by the community. Okay. I've mentioned that it's not only about decision making, it's also an umbrella for some technical initiatives. One of them, we call it Sabre Lingo. So we had this in the past, that the APIs that we have, over 600 of them, were built with different technology stacks over multiple years by different teams, so they differ in style. And we wanted to approach it in a way that I think brings value, but at the same time, it is not a big bang approach to changing the APIs. So we created a group, again. This is under Architecture Guild umbrella. We created a structure that allows people to work together on Sabre Lingo. They produce things like API design style guides that all API should follow. But they also work on what we call data taxonomy. And I think this is an important thing that we decided upon here, is that we look at it as a parts inventory for payloads. It is not like that we created one grand model of all the domains and expect everyone to follow it. We simply said, let's create some small building blocks, and let's make sure that those building blocks are reused across APIs. Such building block might be an address or about a flight in our domain, where we have strict rules what should be part of it, what shouldn't, but teams are free to use them within their domains in the context. And it seemed to work okay for the team in question. We also have some automatic validation tools. We also look at Sabre Lingo as a pool of experts that are interested in APIs that can provide, let's say, internal consulting to teams how to build the APIs properly. And we also have a review process. Initially, we haven't mandated the use of Sabre Lingo. It was more like we marked some APIs as Sabre Lingo compliant, and that was the carrot that was given. But it looks like it was not our initiative, but our product management counterparts decided to require Sabre Lingo for all new APIs. Okay, so again, I wanted to talk about the structure. So we decided to, we have a very small steering committee. It is a team I'm part of, but we've met last time a year ago, so it is not very active. It is mainly how the Lingo should operate. We have Lingo Council that decides about the rules and make some decisions how given set of information should be represented. Then we have an API Center of Practice and Design Governance. This is a group of experts that are actually doing the reviews based on the rules established by Council. And we have a group for people who are building automation tools. And in total, I've counted over 60 people participating in this initiative. And as I mentioned, this is based on Architecture Guild, so it sources people across the whole company, across organization boundaries, and the participation is voluntary. Okay, so here is just one screenshot example, again, from Git docs that describes the cabin code. So it has a clear description, bad and good examples from existing APIs, and also the open API spec fragment for the proposed implementation. So you can see how such individual element is managed. I also wanted to talk about some things that we are, because those things are the things that are already in place. Yes, we've built it. It's not perfect, but it's running fine from our perspective. So we see a room for improvement, and we are tweaking it, but we are not concentrating on it anymore. But there are some things that we are looking to introduce in near future, or doing some, let's say, small pilots right now. So first of it would be peer architecture review. So we talked about architecture review board concepts, and we've heard earlier today the kind of bottleneck it introduced, and I've seen it in the past being a real bottleneck for the teams. But at the same time, I've had several requests from development managers, so from VPs, from even individual teams to review the design they have. And the approach to it that we've decided to take, again, is community-based. So we provide a service to the community that someone can come to us and request a review, and we find a pool of people that are experienced and can provide feedback regarding the given design. So it is not a gate that someone needs to go through, but rather free consulting, and based on experience and done through the community. We are also looking at the technology radar. For internal purposes, we already implemented parts of it, some technology we call it technology life cycle, that helps the team to identify, for example, as we are using Oracle, which Oracle version they should be on right now, when they need to expect the requirement for upgrade and things like that. We also look at improving our knowledge about systems in Sabre, but we also want to approach it through storing of the information about the system within the code itself. So we are looking at asking the teams to have a YAML file with the information about the metadata about the system that is present in given repository, so we can crawl our Git repositories and extract this information. We are actually looking at Backstage as a system that was open sourced by Spotify for developer portal. So we are following the YAML format that Backstage supports, but we are extending it with our own extensions to be able, for example, to map it to products that are defined by product taxonomy, managed by our product management counterparts, or to some artifacts that are operated by our operations team. One thing that we've noticed is that although we have a very good communication with technical community, and we reach majority of teams and are getting the frequent feedback, we don't have that much visibility with non-technical stakeholders. So development managers, product managers, some support people, they don't know the functions that we provide. They don't know when to reach out to us, what kind of decisions rights given ADR has. So that's one area that we feel we need to put much more attention, and we are actively trying to reach out to them and make them aware of the processes and where they can get plugged in. Okay, so conclusions. So from my perspective, involving technical community works. When we started, we are not sure how successful we would be. We started with a small group driving this architecture guild. Initially, we had only invitation-only approach just to get it started, but we've changed it after a month or something like that, as we've seen a lot of interest, and it is open from now on. And people really do attend the meetings, present at those meetings, and also take part in the decisions. What is important, when they take part in decisions, they are much more likely to follow the decisions and much more likely to understand the consequences. So it is also important to say that without such architecture community, it's very difficult to scale. We have, as I mentioned, we have a team of 15 people. If you would like to make every enterprise level decision within the company, we'll have a very significant backlog, and we'll be probably making wrong decisions. We are not the wizards and the only ones know how to design software in the company. We need to rely on the community to do it. But as I mentioned earlier, if we want to use some of those methods that are used at the individual projects level, at the enterprise level, we need to provide some additional structure and formalism, because this communication goes to hundreds of people, and they can understand it differently. The recipients of the message are spread across all time zones. They interact asynchronously with us, and without that additional formalism, it's very easy to convey the wrong meaning. And it also requires a lot of transparency. All the discussions need to be properly documented and publicly available for it to really make sense. Okay, so finalizing. I use the quote from Shrek 2. Are we there yet? No, we haven't finished, yes? And we will not, we have a lot of work before in front of us. But I hope that we are not building an enterprise architecture ivory tower at Sabre, but rather trying to build something that is useful for the community. So thank you. Any questions, comments? Actually, this decision is very controversial, yes, as you can expect. From a corporation perspective, we decided not to use it for now, because there are some ongoing litigations going on in US regarding IP protection, and there are also some security concerns. But at the same time, we wanted to, let's say, to stop the bleeding, so we wanted not to introduce it, but we are actively talking to, in this case, we are talking to GitHub regarding Copilot business, and we are talking to Google as our strategic partner regarding Google Bard, and they've just opened some solution for code as well, to see if we can use it in a way that would be safe for the corporation. So we want to use it, but we were simply not ready to allow it right now. No, we have a, okay, so the question was about this internal technology radar. So we have, let's say, I would call it a pilot right now. So this pilot is just focusing on third-party off-the-shelf software. That's the initial scope. So we are talking about Oracle, Java, Red Hat, and several others off-the-shelf software that we use, where we are tracking the versions and the lifetime of those versions and planned migrations that we need to have. And this is a regular process. There is a person responsible on our side that tracks this information across the company and publishes the information twice a year about updated roadmap. But we want to extend it to other components as well. And we are thinking how to, because the information about the off-the-shelf software is something that comes from our procurement department. It is let's say, based on contracts. What we want to do is to source the information about open source tools that we use within the company and position it if we should adopt it or hold, or very similar to ToughWorks radar. But we are in process of defining the right now, we don't limit it. There were some discussions about some very specific, narrow parts of documentation, but we decided there is no need to do it right now. It is open to everyone within Sabre network.